Uh-oh.
It's just a second. It's
Okay.
setting up. There it goes. Morning, gentlemen. Welcome to the morning show. Jed Bunch and Joe Tolle. Jed's from Roll Design, and Joe Tolle is from ATV On Demand, UTV On Demand. Welcome, gentlemen. I really appreciate you guys taking the time. Jed, I know you had to miss out on a race to be here, and Joe is always willing to talk and be here. But good morning, guys.
Morning.
So, I don't know if you got to watch Supercross, Jed. We didn't get to talk to you pre-show very much, but I did talk with Joe a little bit. Did you see the antics with Deegan?
I know I heard something online, but I didn't watch the race. I was up at the works race at Glen Helen yesterday, and I didn't make it back down in time.
Well, with the total lack of respect for the fans and for his sponsors, I'm just wondering how a guy like this in today's industry can still have sponsors after, telling the whole community to suck his unit. I mean, come on, really.
Yeah.
Where does that come from?
Well, I think he's riding on the coattails of a name, in a lot of ways. I know that a lot of my upcoming riders who were working for their position, and obviously this kid works hard, but um, they wouldn't get away with that. I think that if this wasn't a name that was already big in the industry, that we would probably see a lot more backlash than we do now. But I guess we'll see how it works out.
Well, I know back in the day with Honda, they would have already smacked him down and he'd already been on the bench. I
Oh,
mean, it
there's
was
no doubt.
no time at all.
There's no question.
What, Joe, you're a little bit more familiar with the Blue Mafia. What's going on?
Uh-huh.
You know?
Well, just real quick recap for anyone who didn't see it. The controversy was, you had, oh boy, I'm going to fail at names because I'm on the spot, but that's okay. Deegan and his teammate, no offense to him. What's Cole? Is that right? Cole Davies. Yeah, I think they were 1 and 2 in the points, and Davies was leading, and Lawrence is closing in, and they came through the checkered, or they came through the finish line, and the clock hadn't quite gone, so they had to do another lap. So there was like 2 to go. They were 1.5 laps away from the finish. Deegan was all over him. You know, there was a bowl turn. They came into it. It's very often, and it's not. I don't think it's a dirty pass at all. It's, you get in there, you get aggressive, you take the guy to the top of the turn, you make him hit the brakes, so he has to stop, and then you squirt off the corner and you take the lead, and you have momentum, and they don't. And what ended up happening I mean, it looked very much like Deegan came in and, you know, bumped the guy off the top of the berm, like took him over the top. It looked pretty damn aggressive to do it to your teammate, especially your teammate who's number 2 in points. I don't know how that results in Cole's position in the points chase after getting a 5th place finish, because it took him from 1st to 5th. So I don't know what that does for his chances of even maintaining. Maybe he's still got 2nd in points. I missed that part, but that's a risky game. He could have potentially taken himself out and cost them both, the podium. So it was dirty. It looked a little dirty to me. And I don't mind aggressive riding, but to do it to your teammate, to your points, rival, I don't know. Maybe Yamaha doesn't care. I don't run a Supercross team, so I'm not really cool with the politics of it, not really hip to it. But then he gets on, and then the crowd was pissed. Like, the crowd obviously thought that it was dirty, because you see him get off the track, that helmet comes off, man. It was like a pro wrestling crowd, and out walked the heel, and they're like, boo. I mean, it's like one of the biggest boos I've ever heard from a Supercross crowd. Then he gets on the podium and opens his mouth, and boo. And, you know, the kid gets very aggressive with his opinion on what the crowd thinks of him and acts like, if you want to boo me, it just motivates me. And he gets up there and it's like I'm watching pro wrestling in 1996 and here comes D-Generation X doing crotch chops. And he's just like, if you don't like it, you can suck it. And I'm just like, did you really just tell a bunch of women and children they can suck it? Like, it just makes me, I sit there, looked at my wife and I said, I wish I had pit passes. I wish I could walk back to the pits and be like, hey, I didn't like it.
Mhm.
Why don't you make me suck it?
It's a horrible representation of Yamaha, the sport, and in his own brand. I didn't care for his dad and his dad's antics, in the motorcycle deal with Metal Militia, and then rolling into the racing in the trucks. His dad was just always a jerk, in my opinion. I don't think we see the same out of the daughter in Nash truck, but I just don't think they tolerate it at all. You know, Something's got to be done because professionalism's got to come back to Supercross, or you're going to lose it. That's just my take on it. But I'm old school. I'm the oldest one here. Jed, I don't know how you feel about it, beings that you know you come from a little bit different background than I do. It's just something I just think it needs to change.
And I agree. And I think there's just a lot going on in society in general when it comes to norms and uh, people being polite. I just don't see it with the next generation, men holding doors for women. You can go right down the line, just being a gentleman in general. So I do think there's in society, people we're degrading in that respect, and it trickles down into everything we do. It starts at home. That's I don't know. Maybe it's the spankings. We quit giving kids swats in the schools, and everything has just gone downhill. But yeah, no, I do. I see it in all aspects of life, Leonard, not just racing.
Yeah, it's a bummer. But thanks guys for indulging me in that topic because I was a little outraged when I seen it. Um, I have trouble sleeping in the middle of the night, and sometimes I wake up, and that's what I woke up to in the middle of the night. While I was trying to get myself back to sleep, and I seethed on it all night. I know that the company that I work for, when we were sponsoring riders, one of the things is if your machine broke, you bring it back. You have your helmet on or you have your helmet with you. You don't throw a temper tantrum. You don't say anything negative. You just bring it back. And you could just never have that kind of bad attitude or bad behavior.
Yeah, well,
So
there's definitely a lot of responsibility, in my opinion, that comes with being a brand ambassador. There's,
right
there's
on. I agree. Go ahead, Joe.
I was just gonna say, I think where we're beating on him, which I think he deserves. I mean, I was standing up off the couch, giving the TV two middle fingers. Um, you know, I I was Cole Davies when he got off the track. I mean, he was pissed, and I don't hold anything. I'll take anything away from him. He threw his goggles or something on the ground. You could tell the body language. He was angry. And then when they put the mic in front of him, it was like, oh boy, here we go. And what a professional, like, Cole Davies is like, I accept responsibility. I shouldn't have been in that position. I shouldn't, I got hung up in lappers and it allowed him to catch me. And so instead of in any way, he in no way went after Deegan, which to me was like he did it for the benefit of the team. He was mad. And can I say that I know he was mad at Deegan and he wasn't mad at himself? No. But who wouldn't have been pissed at Deegan? It was unnecessary. He was clearly the fastest guy on the track. He was probably going to make that pass at some point in the next lap and a half. Seemed unnecessary, but Davies just totally like something in life. I'm always telling people, like, if you blame other people for your problems, you're going to continue to have problems. If you look at every problem you have as it's your problem, you're not going to have a lot of problems because you're not going to let that happen again, or you're going to do something different. And, Davies did an outstanding job of being professional and taking, putting all the blame on himself, which I think would be very hard for anyone to do. And so he looked outstandingly professional. And yeah, there's a good role model. Not,
I get it.
not
I get
right.
it. In the chat, they agree with us. And, they're, if I were on the blue squad, I'd be giving Davies a raise and demoting Deegan because the championships in a negative light are still a negative light. But let's get into the ATV industry, or the industries in a whole. It could affect motorcycles, ATVs, UTVs, and talk a little bit about sales. Jed, you're directly involved with sales. Joe, you have a sales portion. I'm directly involved with sales. So we all have our different backgrounds. Um, there's a lot of things in the government that are causing disruptions in some of our parts. Some of us are, some of us aren't having issues. Workforce is also an issue. Jed, what are some of the difficulties in sales that you're seeing with Roll Design?
Well, if you're discussing current, like with tariffs and stuff like that, that's how that's affecting our business. Obviously, Elka's in Quebec, so it's in Canada. We've had to put numerous orders on hold over the course of the past few months, in order to avoid the 25% tariff. At this point, there was a 90-day pause, so we've resumed business as usual. There is a tariff in place on parts orders, so we've had to break up our orders. There's an $800 threshold, so if you order over 800, you're going to pay the tariff. Under 800, you can avoid it.
Oh, man.
So yeah, as you can imagine, it takes a long time to move parts, into the country that way. So that's been an issue. We're working around it. Thankfully, our company doesn't get anything that I can really think of that from China. That would be a bigger issue for us. I know, the shock companies, Elka, whoever you're talking about, Fox, they all source parts through China. So there could be down the line for them supply chain issues. But at this point, we've kind of been working around it. It's slowed us down quite a bit. Overall sales, if we're looking at retail sales for us, stuff going out the door, that slowed down quite a bit in the past few months. It's been more sporadic. But the racing side of things, that's still moving and grooving. I was at the Works race yesterday up at Glen Helen, and people are showing a lot of enthusiasm about building new machines and moving forward with all that. So that was a good sign. I was real happy to hear that people were still investing in their sport. Whether it's their career or it's a hobby, they're still interested in moving forward. So, there's good and bad, and I know guys who own machine shops in town who are doing very well because of this. Their orders are way up because manufacturing now, some of it's coming back to certain, small and medium-sized businesses. So there's winners and there's losers. And I think right now we're just sort of in the middle. We're getting through it, but it's definitely, there's been some disruptions. Yeah.
But overall in the ATV market, you're still, you do shocks for UTVs, but you don't sell suspension components for UTVs.
Correct.
Most of your suspension components are
ATV.
Right.
Yeah, and that was a decision made by Doug years ago when I came on to Roll Design about 11 years ago now. I pushed really hard for us to build control arms for UTVs because I saw that was where the market was going. The manufacturers were producing units, new stuff. There's innovation happening. ATV was the opposite. They were eliminating models, and there was no innovation. So, I was pushing very hard for it, and Doug wanted to be a shock builder for other fabricators. And he knew that if we were a fabricator of UTV parts and we walked in the door at Lone Star and said, "Hey, we want to build your shocks," they're going to hold up a cross and, hey, you're the competitor, get out of here. We didn't want to be that to any of those guys. We wanted to work with them on shocks. So that was the direction. That's why we didn't do UTV control parts, was so that we could work with the shocks and not be a competitor to them. So yeah, on the UTV side of it, I would say we sell about 50% of our shocks overall, our UTV shocks, ATV to UTV percentage wise. But ATVs for roll design still drives a very large part of our business.
Well, I know that Doug and you and yourself have both worked with other suspension manufacturers in the ATV industry and seem to have pretty good relationships
Yeah.
with Walsh and JB, some of the big names. And that I don't know if that's just because of the length of time that Doug's been in the ATV industry, or maybe it's just the help and development in the suspension. I'm not sure how you could categorize that.
Well, you're right on both sides, and yeah, we do have a relationship with them, and we do work with them on suspension. But also, there's a certain amount of respect. We respect that motocross back east is largely Mike Walsh, and that's their territory back there. J Global Impact Solutions, he runs the Elka Service Center back there. So we try not to step on toes by going there and saying, okay, we're going to come try and muscle into your area and be the big shots out here back east. We focus very much on the West Coast work series, Baja series, stuff like that out here. We'll work with people from back east happily, but we don't really try and step on toes. And I think that comes into play as well.
What do you see, Joe, when you're talking about the differences in the regions? Does that affect how you sell videos or how your videos are watched? It's kind of a sales market as well.
I mean, do you mean regions or do you mean like
Regions, yeah,
types of vehicle?
regions.
East Coast versus West Coast?
Well, yeah, because you almost have a four regional deal here. You have your East Coast, your West Coast, your South, and your North. Because you got guys doing a little bit different in the North with the 4x4 machines is where I'm going with that one, and doing different things in the South with the 4x4 machines.
Well, I mean, I think I really can't say regionally, what if there's any issues. I don't think it's like a regional thing. Um, Obviously we test with all the OEMs, all the OEM machines, and regionally I have nothing. I just know that as far as vehicle type, here's Dirt Wheels magazine. If I flip through this magazine, you've got probably 90% of the ads are side by side. And that's and of course side by sides are huge. They make a ton of them. And I know that like we love sport quads, and those are way down to a YFZ 450R and a Raptor, but there's still a ton of 4x4 ATVs on the market, a ton. And it's not like that segment's being completely ignored. Can-Am has completely revamped their entire line of ride-on machines over the past 2 years. Honda cosmetically updated and renamed the Rincon into the Rubicon. Yamaha updated the power steering on Grizzly this year, as well as their side-by-side. So there's, Kawasaki restyled Brute Force. So they're still doing things in the 4x4 segment to update the machines, try to keep them, relevant, and some of them are all brand new. The thing is, when it comes to the marketing side of it, since I wear an editorial hat and a lot of times a marketing hat as a small business operator, everybody wants to spend the money on the side-by-sides. Nobody wants to spend money on the ATV side. And there are a few exceptions. And obviously, anybody you see advertising in our ATV content, buy from them because they actually give a crap about you. But, it's getting to the point where I talk to companies and it's like, we have all this ATV content. And they're like, yeah, we're really making the push in side-by-sides. And the problem is that you can't you can't teach someone to think a certain way in business if, maybe I'm wrong and they're not, but I know that 2008, when the recession happened back then, everybody took their foot off the gas and Polaris put their foot on the gas and they went to number one. Right now, tire companies as an example, I won't name any names, but every tire company, look through this magazine. Every tire company almost in here is all UTV tire, all UTV tire. These products don't carry over to the ATV rider. These new tires are too heavy, too many plies. They're rock crawl tires. Unless you've got a 1 liter bike, they sack your power. They mess up your handling. Too much unsprung weight. And if you spend $1 to advertise in the side-by-side space now, well, guess what? You got 20 other companies doing it too. Your reach is very, is very diminished. Whereas you go spend $1 in ATVs to advertise, boy, it's going to stand out because no one else is doing it. And they're very different machines. The needs are not exactly the same. But that's where I see it, is that like the OEMs haven't completely forgotten the ride-on segment, but the aftermarket doesn't seem very focused on it. Fortunately, I have had a conversation with a couple companies where I'm like, ATVs aren't dead. The sport quad market's very limited at this point, but these people have machines too, and they need parts, and you're completely ignoring them. And a couple people are like, oh, didn't think of that.
I totally think that in some cases that the advertisers have forgotten, that the ATV consumer, they think that they're all gone. No, there's a massive amount of people riding ATVs, building ATVs all across the country, really all across the world. Your world market is bigger now in some cases than it was before. We talk about tariffs, Jed brought it up. Canada's sales are great. Really, they are. We have UK, France, Portugal getting orders where they were kind of off for a little while. They're back. They're coming back, and so it's a little unsettling to a point because I don't understand what's happening when I'm getting large orders from all over the world when we're supposed to be in this financial downswing. Especially in the sport quad industry,
Yeah,
So,
from a manufacturing perspective too, it's challenging when there's not a lot of sales behind a product. I get people all the time that call Roll Design. They're like, hey, well, can you just make me one swing arm? Can you make me, this one part? And the reality of it is you can't, not if you want to keep your doors open and be profitable. You've got to build 50 or 100 at a time. And then you've got to be able to sell that 50 to 100 of those parts for this one model that, and that's where the ATV market started to leave manufacturers kind of high and dry. Was there just wasn't the volume of sales required to support the manufacturing. And that's why I think the UTVs got so popular, because so many of them are produced. There's just sheer numbers out there.
Not to interrupt, but what I'm seeing from the UTV world is that the sales are dropping. And
I agree with that right now.
The amount of damaged machines in warehouses from the insurance industry, like that is a whole nother market. But I didn't really want to get into that today.
Right.
Yeah, you're actually helping me transition into my next segment here. The developmental time of product. So if you follow the show, and a lot of guys in the chat do, we had a show talking about LT250s and LT500s and, the product that these guys want us to develop, which we talked about 250Rs and other models. When you're developing a new product, what is the time frame for something like that? And what could somebody expect? Okay, we have a LTR, an LT250R, and we want to build A arms. Roll Design never built arms for this model, but now you have guys calling you for that arm. How do you consider it, and how does the development process happen?
Well, we've considered the LT, if we're talking specifically about the Quadzilla and the LT 250, and we declined on that because of just the amount of units out there in the world. I mean, yeah, it seems like when you have 10 people call you that you could sell 1 million front ends, and the reality is out of those 10 people, you could probably sell 5. But as far as the development process, you're asking about time. At Roll Design, we're a little bit slow. We have one-man departments. I mean, it could take us, months to years, depending on how the project goes, to develop a new product through front end. It's the fixtures. You got the tooling that gets expensive. You can spend 10, 20, $30,000 on your tooling just to get geared up for new stuff. And that's not, considering misalignment spacers or laser cut heat treated parts or special ball joint tapers. It's just, you go right down the line to machine shop parts. And, even right now, let's just look at one model, KFX 450. It's a model that's not built anymore. And we build cross country and we build motocross arms for the KFX. The problem now is the front ends use a lot of OEM Kawasaki parts, which used to be cheap. Now, when you go to even us at our cost, we go to Kawasaki to buy all these OEM Kawasaki parts. I can't make $1 on the front end because I've got $500, $400 worth of Kawasaki parts that go into that front end. So, it's just, you really need a high volume part for it to make sense. And as far as development, I mean, the sky's the limit. We never stop developing at Roll Design. We're always building new parts. We're building a YFZR cross country front end right now. That's been something that's been wanted for quite a while. We've been working on that for 3 months. Doug's got the YFZR on the bench right now. He's fitting the front end. So I would say a project, let's just talk about the cross country front end for the YFZR. That project, start to finish, is probably going to be 6 to 12 months before we have a finished product.
That's perfect. Okay, that you answered it that way. So you got 6 to 12 months in that. You have fixtures. How do you roll all of that development into pricing it and making it available for the consumer? I mean, what I'm trying to ask is, how is the cost calculated?
Well, I mean, you've got to take your material cost and, of course, labor costs and all your overhead of your building and whatnot. And then usually there's a math equation that's applied to that. You double, triple, whatever the case may be. And then it also depends on whether you're trying to establish a dealer tier. If I'm selling to Duncan, which I do, then I have to have a percentage tier for you to make a profit and still for Roll Design not to go backwards. And then you got to look at sponsorship stuff. You got to bake all that into it because some of this product's going to be given away to people for racing or deeply discounted for racing. So everything has to come into play. And for us, it's not just the control arm. The development doesn't stop there. It really starts there because the shock development is what our specialty is. The A-arm at the end of the day is a piece of metal with a ball joint at the end. Once you get it right, it's right. The shock is where the magic happens. The valving and the spring rates and we're playing with pistons now, and we're blueprinting the adjustment cartridges for more flow, more equal flow. So all that really for us is the big part of our business is the shock tuning. So that's what takes, and that's what never ends. That's what will go on forever. They're shock tuning right now as I speak up at Glen Helen, my son and Doug. That never ends. That's the beautiful part about the shock side of it, is that the sky's the limit, is you're constantly able to make changes.
Joe, did you have something you wanted to chime in? You've been patiently sitting there so quiet. I'm
Sorry, Joe.
No, it's okay. No, it's okay. Please, let Jed talk. No, I'm interested. I'm just listening like everybody else. I'm not on that level, so I don't have a ton of stuff to add to it.
Okay, no problem. But anytime you get something, just jump right on in. As you develop the A-arm, so we got the A-arm developed, we already have it done, we figured it, we're selling that to the consumer. You're talking about, I'm gonna shift into a section that I didn't have in the layout. Suspension development. It's unusual that you would admit that it is always changing because the development of the shock has to increase and get better and better and better.
Mhm.
You've been around, let's say you've been around longer than 11 years, but involved with Roll 11 years. How much change have you seen in that 11 years from what the suspension did before to what it does now?
A dramatic change. And it's not just what it does so much as how it does it. They've come into high flow pistons now. We didn't have that when we started. When I first started with Roll Design, it was the stage 4 dual compression shock, and then that right at that time the stage 5 was coming out, and we went through a lot of growing pains with that. But as far as the overall feel of the shocks, I would say it's a night and day difference over the course of the past decade. And a lot of that was accomplished with hydraulic flow. When you went from the stage 4 to the stage 5 shock, that was one of the biggest changes, was the internal fluid ports were opened up. And that allowed us to more freely valve these shocks. We were able to spring them lighter and valve them heavier. And that gave us more of that hydraulic feel on the shock. Whereas early on in Elka's their career, or when they started back in 2000, early 2000s, they had more reliance on spring rate. They needed a heavier spring, and the hydraulics were just kind of there to slow it down. Whereas now we use the hydraulics more to slow things down, and the spring is just kind of there for hold up. So it really did give us, and that's one thing I like about Elka, is they are innovative. They're always coming out with new parts, and that can be challenging on one hand, but also it gives you tools to work with on the other, and room to make improvement. So that's what I've really enjoyed the most, was the new parts and the innovation out of the company that gave us the tools that we needed to bring these machines to the next level. Because if you ride one, let's say from 2004, and then you get on a machine now, it is a night and day difference in terms of the plushness and the overall feel and the confidence that it gives the rider.
Now,
So
I got a question for my own educational stuff, because I've kind of been here through all this, and like maybe I need to get some stuff straight in my head, but it kind of seemed like, and this was just from personal experience with a few sets of shocks back in the day, like the Legacy series that Elka sells now, which is a very good, for the money type of price point machine. I mean, what, a whole set from Elka is like, what, $1,400, something like that.
17 for the Legacy Plus, right? Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it seemed like old school Elka, like, the black and red, not the gray and red. Like, our personal experience back then with testing, and as an example, I had a set of the Legacy series, but back then in 2005, it wasn't Legacy; it was their top of the line stuff. I had a set valve for some Metalcraft motocross A-arms. That company's not around anymore. And then my buddy Aaron, who one of my test riders, he had a set of Axis on a Walsh front end, and our bikes set side by side, and I'd push down on my front end, and my front end was valved for a 210-pound rider, and Aaron was probably like $165. You'd push down on that Elka front end, and it would just hang out. Like, it wouldn't come back to ride height with energy. And Aaron's Axis front end at the time, and we're not picking on Elka, this is just, it could be just a fluke. He'd push down on his front end, or back end for that matter, and the bike would controllably, but with energy, return to ride height. And I know that pushing down on your bike is not a way to test suspension, but I'm sure you guys even will do it just to like feel it, just to how does this thing feel like it cycles. And the Elkas just felt at that time in history pretty lifeless. I thought that, like, the stage shocks, and please correct me because I want to make sure I got this right, but I thought like stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 was all kind of like as the older shocks became the legacy shocks, stage 1 through 5, I thought kind of came out at once with a focus on improved hydraulic flow. Because to me, the old Elka shocks were kind of, they didn't store energy. They didn't return energy to the rider. Like you're preloading off a jump. The shocks don't, you know what I mean, as far as storing energy, I'm sure.
Sure.
I think about it because I mountain bike a lot, and it matters on a bicycle. You really feel it.
Yeah.
But what's the story with how the Elkas evolved? Because I thought the stage series 1 through 5 all kind of came out at once with that focus on improved flow. What's the difference? And one last part, like we had a set, because I want to leave on a high note for Elka.
Yeah.
Recently, we did a sportsman build last year. And that big 1000 is very boaty. It's very rolly. It's wide, so it's kind of stable, but it's very boaty and rolly. As soon as we put stage 4s on it, because I was like, okay, is the average guy at home for his Sportsman 1000, can the average racer even handle a stage 5 high and low speed compression rebound? I find a lot of racers don't even typically understand how to tune their own shocks. So for the build, we were like, let's just go stage 4s, like low speed compression, low speed rebound. That's probably all 90% of the guys out here on a 4x4, probably 98% of them would ever need. So straighten me out, please.
Well, we'll start with early Elka shocks were a steel body product. And they had stage 3, they had Dune series, they experimented with different, we'll call them marketing gimmicks of sorts or naming of the shocks. The stages always revolved around the adjustments. So, if we're looking at it currently, stage 2 is a shock that doesn't have low speed compression control on it. Stage 3, they have the low speed compression control. This is the aluminum series now, if we're talking about the newer aluminum body series.
Yeah, the gray shocks.
Right.
Great.
Well, that's
Great.
essentially the biggest difference. They went from aluminum or from steel bodies to aluminum bodies. The old Elka shocks were all steel bodies. And so the stages, essentially, you add adjustments. When you get to 3, you have low speed compression. When you get to stage 4, you have low speed and you have rebound control. When you get to stage 5, you get the low speed, the high speed, and the rebound control. So essentially, it's just adding more external hydraulic control to the system. The Legacy series, which you mentioned, and the Legacy Plus, it is essentially the old Elka shock. It is a steel body shock. It has smaller internal fluid ports. They're only available in a low speed adjustment, no low speed, high speed. So the Legacy is essentially the old Elka shock in a lot of ways. And the stages are just more adjustment externally. So a lot of what changed, like I mentioned earlier, from the early Elka shocks to now was the internal flow. That is what gave us what we have now in terms of performance. One of the other questions you had about was the different stages, right? What was the other question you had on that? I wrote a couple things down. Steel body stages.
Well, I think you kind of already answered one of them, which was the new stage series, the aluminum body series that came out like what, 2006, 2007, maybe. I don't remember what.
Yeah, it was, well, the stage 5 came out in about 2011 or 12-ish, and then the small bottles on the stage 5 came out in like 2014. Right around there.
I remember when they went to the new stage series aluminum body shocks, we saw them at the AIM Expo, and one thing they pointed out to us was that they really focused on more internal flow, and I believe that was from like the body into the reservoir and back. It's been a long time since I shot that interview, but
yeah.
And to me, when I heard that, it's like, okay, that's what these guys needed to do. And when we put the stage 4s on our Sportsman, like they didn't have that kind of old school like lack of energy feel. The bike felt a lot more energetic than I initially expected. Like I could tell, like, okay, these things, they do return to ride height well. They do store some energy if you want to preload the bike for something. I guess another question would be, is there, if you built me some shocks, if you built me a stage 3, stage 4, stage 5, obviously I gain more external adjustment as we go up in the stages and add more knobs. But if I never touched the adjustments and you just said, here's a shock, stage 3, stage 4, stage 5, you build them all the same. Is there any difference in the internals that are going to result in a difference in performance if I don't start going for clickers, or would it essentially feel like the same shock?
If it's valved internally correctly, it should feel like the same shock. A stage 4 and a stage 5 in aluminum series, for instance, have the same flow through the cartridge, according to the dyno, and according to what we've learned in the field as well. So theoretically, we can valve a stage 4 shock exactly the same as a stage 5. Now, if you race, that doesn't work for you, because when you're at the track, you've got to make adjustments. But there are, like you said, a lot of guys who don't ever touch their clickers. And for someone like that, you're not going to notice much of a difference between a stage 3 and a stage 4 or a stage 5 if they're valved correctly. Where it becomes an issue is when you change terrain and, you know, a guy comes under the tent and he says, hey, this thing's diving in the corners, you know, or whatever the case may be, and you don't have the external adjustment to fix that problem, then you're forced to say, hey, remove that shock. We got to go inside of it. You're probably not going to make your race. So for racing, that doesn't really work out. You did mention, sorry,
Jed, I want to clarify something for you. Because we have such a wide range of people that listen to the show and that are involved in it, performance riding and racing are so similar.
I agree.
Because your rec guys that are on the cusp and they're out there and they're putting their machine through the test, they're the guys that are buying stage 5s because they want that ultimate performance machine so that it's giving them everything that they can get out of it.
Yeah.
It's just a term deal where when we talk about racing, sometimes we have people tune out because they're not racing, even though they're aggressively riding.
And I agree with that. You know, I never raced. I was just an aggressive recreational rider. And I can tell you from my experience that when I changed terrain, I always like to adjust my shocks. It was something that I do even now. It's something that I like to have external adjustments on my shocks because it's something that allows you to fine tune it just like you would have a suit custom tailored to you. It's just to me, it makes a lot of sense. And Joe, I want to go back to the Axis. You mentioned Axis shocks before, and we did work with Axis for a lot of years.
Oh yeah, I remember. It was like the early days. It was
right.
roll axis, and then it switched.
Right. Well, when Penske bought Axis, that's when that changed. They didn't have the same desire to work on a level with engineers with an ATV company as they did before. They became big time. You know, they were racing NASCAR and stuff like that. So that's when we pivoted over to Elka, and Elka had a lot of development issues in the early days. I had a 2004 YFZ 450 with all of our suspension on it, had the Elka shocks, the best that Elka made at the time. And I had a Lobo with Axis shocks on it. And you can guess which one I like to ride. You know, it was the Axis equipped Lobo, hands down. I didn't even ride the Elka equipped YFZ. It was an abomination, in my opinion. So yeah, I mean, I agree with you a lot about what you were saying on the early days. They just didn't have the development that was necessary to make it work. And Axis, we had been already working with Axis for quite some time at that point. So Axis and Mike Halleck, that had all come a long way, that whole program. So definitely agree with you on the old Axis and how they felt. And our shocks now, I would go toe to toe with any shock company now, because of the amount of progress that we've made since those days, definitely.
Well, if you look at Elka, they're dominating every form of ATV racing.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Well, they're putting a lot, they put a lot into the racing program, and that's what it's all about. And you look at sponsors right now, a lot of companies are pulling back. Polaris, Can-Am, all the tire companies, they're all, sending letters either eliminating or reducing their sponsorship efforts during this time. And Elka's not. They're
If
they're
that's
they're
the
pushing
wrong way
forward.
that's the wrong way to advertising. But Joe, you
Yeah.
had something to say.
Oh no, I was just gonna kind of just reaffirm that, like, yeah, I mean, old Elka and new Elka, like those of us who've been in the industry 20 years, I mean, don't listen to me, anybody in the chat, don't listen to me talking about old Elka and think that's like new Elka. It's totally different. It's totally different. Like it's not the same company. Well, it is the same company, sort of. But it's not the same performance shocks. We're talking 20 years ago, very early days of it. You know, I remember, and obviously national champ right now, Joel Hetrick's riding Elkas. Back in the day when Natalie won a title on Fox, he switched to Elka the next year, and he's like, "Oh, I'm getting an arm pump," and it's like, "Yeah, you switch shocks," and
Right.
it was like no one ever said it, but I believe that whole season, like, dude, it's your shocks. You switch shock companies. Now you have arm pump. Obviously now Elk is winning every year. So, that the past is the past, and people grow and get better. Believe me, I listen to my old commentary on camera and it's like, Jesus, I didn't use cocaine. I promise. I just sounded like I did. Um, I didn't know what I was doing. I was learning, and same thing.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you guys are aware, but Elka was purchased by another company in the last few years, a company called Liberty Springs. We've all driven on Liberty Springs. We just don't know it. They're an OEM manufacturer of car springs and such. And they have a new technology. It's a composite type spring. I don't know how much I'm supposed to say about this. But that's essentially why they bought Elka, was to show. They didn't have a platform to advertise or to showcase this new product, so they needed a shock company essentially to do this with, and that's why they bought Elka. If you pick up a shock off of a side by side, half of the weight is the mainspring, the carbon steel spring. These are more of a composite type spring that, I mean, you can lift them with your pinky, and I'm talking a 16-inch, 3.5-inch ID monster spring that's normally, heavy. It's featherweight. So there's going to be even more innovation and more changes down the line now that we have a much larger mother company that, again, is creating more innovation. So I'm excited about that.
I have a question for you. I have a question on that. And I do know they got bought out. I didn't know who it was by or what their background was.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that I've seen a lot in power sports is conglomerates, like big manufacturing companies, will come in. Now, at least these guys were already in the shock business. That's a great sign. But I've seen 3 out of 4 times when a company gets bought out from the original owner, they become difficult to work with. There's a lot of downside to it. Do you think, and I know this is kind of a, I don't want to put you on the spot with it, but do you think there's going to be any downside to this, or do you think it's going to be all upside for the consumer?
Well, like I said, when it happened with Axis, it was all downside, and that's when we got with Elka, was when Penske bought Axis, kind of a similar situation. So far, I don't see that being an issue at all, because the company that bought them wants to be innovative. They want to progress. They want to grow it with this new technology that they have. So far, it has not gotten in the way of anything that would affect the consumers or product line. It's actually been a positive at this point. We weren't sure. I'm going to tell you straight away, Joe, that we didn't know when this all started how it was going to play out, because we were friends with Martin, the owner of Elka, for years. I mean, he would come to my home, Doug's home, and it was a good thing. We really felt close to the company and to the owner. So yeah, there was some concern when they sold to this big conglomerate. But at this point, no, I don't see any issues moving forward because of who the company is. It's a Canadian company. in Canada, they really can't sell to outside countries. It has to stay within the country. So Liberty is a Canadian company as well. And they're really on board. We've talked to the CEO before of the new company, and everything is moving the right direction. And they're not cutting programs. And that's a big part of it, because they do have, deep pockets, which is a good thing too. So.
I'll have to say, from my standpoint, from ATV-TALK standpoint, and the other company that I work for, they've done that. They've came and visited us. They've gotten email conversations. They're wanting to grow the market with us, and that's going to transition us into our last segment, is advertising. Elka also understands the advantage to advertising at a higher rate now when things are different than when things are great and everybody's moving along and everybody's advertising. They are reaching out. They have a gentleman there named Charles. Him and I are back and forth at least once a week talking about advertising things, what we can do to grow, their reach. That's why I think another reason why I think Elka is growing right now instead of shrinking. Jed, I know you're feeling it. Our orders are constant, and with you and Elka, because I buy shocks from both companies.
Right.
Some people wonder why. Well, there's things that Roll Design does to a shock that Elka doesn't, and I buy that specific for those specific riders.
Mhm.
And then the other people can use the shocks that come directly from Elka. So,
Well, you can buy a suit through Armani, but it's not tailored to you. So we custom tailor that to the specific end user.
well, I
I-
have an engineer that
Great
I get to
analogy.
work with. Go ahead. What was that, Joe?
No, I was just saying that's a great analogy.
Right. We have a good engineer that we work with up there, and we're really like the results that we're getting, but just like we get from you. So as we roll into the advertising conversation, this is gonna probably roll into Joe's expertise because he's been doing this longer than I have, obviously. But you mentioned that all of these people are cutting back. How does Roll Design deal with racing and advertising and because you see the cutbacks?
Mhm.
How does it affect your company? And Joe, you jump in whenever you want.
Well, since you asked me first, I'll start. For us, we've been really small with advertising from the start. We primarily hit the races. That's where we generate a lot of our business, is at the track. Um, and as far as just flat out advertising, I would say that it's been a long time since we did anything in a magazine or anything like that. I've been doing more of a grassroots type of campaign through Facebook groups. Um, Believe it or not, I drive a lot of business to our small little company just through these chats. People will ask a question and I'll get tagged in a post. You jump in there and someone needs some help with a project or whatever the case may be. So we're very, very small in that respect. I think Joe's taking it to another level with the YouTubes and all this other stuff. We haven't really gone that far. We're such a small company with one-man departments that there's only so much work we can handle anyway. So, for me, again, it's just very small grassroots type stuff. And as far as sponsorships, we've had to pull back a little bit on what we give away. It's the Elka side, not as much because we have the factory backing, but Roll Design itself, we were forced to definitely tighten the purse strings just a little bit. But no, I mean, it's something that's very dynamic. We take it 1 year at a time. But yeah, this year has definitely been a bit of a slowdown.
Right. I get it, but we all have to keep the growing in the advertising. Joe, what do you got for that?
Well, I mean, you know, it's kind of like we were talking about earlier with, right now, a lot of companies aren't advertising in the ATV segment. Well, the market in general. Now, I don't know if you're going to see a lot of people take their foot off the gas this time. I know I think high torque sales are doing well. We're having a lot of conversations with some companies. I think we're going to pick up some new companies right now in this slight economic downturn, this bump, these bumps we're getting through with the tariffs, which I'm not going deep into politics. I know why we're doing them. We lost so much manufacturing from the 90s till now. We've slowly suffered without knowing how much we were suffering. And I think right now with the lack of manufacturing, we kind of have to look at it like, well, now we have cancer, and our cancer is a lack of manufacturing jobs. And when you get cancer, you have two choices. You suffer and live, or you suffer and die. So, I think the tariffs are potentially just like chemotherapy. It's going to make you puke. It's going to make you sick, but it's your only chance of getting better. So I just wanted to kind of add that in. But I think the companies that realize, like guys who are older, like us, we've seen these cycles with the economy, and when your competition takes dollars off the table in advertising, and you put money on the table in advertising, you're getting twice the effect, because like side-by-side tire ads, same analogy again. If there's 15 companies in this book that have pictures of their new side-by-side tires on a side-by-side, well, your ad money is competing against all that other ad money. Whereas if you're the one company that puts an ATV tire ad in this book, like, hey, the ITP Terracross is a great, ATV tire, lightweight, radial construction, improves ride, great in all conditions, perfect for your ATV. That's going to stand out. The less competitors you have in a space where you put your money, the more they're going to see you. And that's kind of like partly why we as a company split out our ATV and our side-by-side content, probably 8-10 years ago, because it was like, if I start, I have a core ATV audience, and I want to present them with ATV content, not side-by-side content. So, now Roll Design, I'm not saying anything about them, because you've got companies like Roll, Walsh, PEP, like Access. You've got these racetrack companies that are famous for being at the racetrack or known by all the racers, and their stuff kind of sells itself because you've got this elite group of buyers who have the money, who want the best. But everybody else who's not so big up in that space, like if you're going to be known, you're going to have to get your products out there in front of people. So for those companies that aren't famous from racing, I think downturn, throw money in the pool. If your competition's not, and you are, you're going to have more reach. You're going to have more impact. When your competition pulls back, hit the gas. So that's how you make the pass.
And the tire market's a little different too, because I just see that as being something that there's a lot of product behind it. Everyone needs tires constantly. It's a wear item. Where with control arms, someone buys a front end, and that thing can last them their whole life if they treat it right, unless they're racing and they rotate parts in and out. But I've had guys that bought a front end on their 250R 20 years ago, and they're still running it. You know what I mean? So it's just the volume, I guess, is what I was getting at. Tire manufacturers have high volume simply because tires wear out quick, and you're constantly rotating them out of your, inventory. But
what?
Yeah.
One comment I made to Mike Walsh was, we talked about a project a couple of years ago, and I didn't chase it hard. I was just kind of like, yeah, project maybe. He's like, yeah, we're busy racing this, that, and the other. And one thing I said to Mike that really made a connection, even for the race brands that don't really think of it. And I've had people tell me, like, you'll never get Wayne Meridian to work with you. And I'm like, you think? First I was told you'll never get RPM to work with you because they're too big. RPM worked with me, and they'll work with me again, I bet, because I told them I'll get you 100,000 views. I'll get you in front of a whole lot of people that aren't at the track and let them know that most pros run your axles, even sponsored by other axle manufacturers. And I think that's one thing that kind of hurts the more elite brands is that, like I said to Mike, like Mike, perspective. And he respected it. And I said, you are huge where you operate. Then there's the other 90% of the people out there that don't race, that they don't know Walsh from Alba, and they, and if they buy from you, it's not going to come with a discount request. Anybody who races is going to be like resume, discount,
Right.
whether you'll give it or not. But general consumer, especially if they're a little bit older, if you can show those people and explain to those people, like, these guys have a superior product and why, they'll buy it and they won't even ask you for a discount.
Mm-hmm.
And Mike's like, never really thought of it like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the one problem that the really high-end companies get into, especially if they're looking to increase volume of sales, is you've got to get, if you are the best or you're one of the best, then you kind of got to let everybody else know who doesn't go to the track. And I think that's one place where the high-end companies get hung up in growth, is everybody tells them they're the best, so that they talk to, so they assume everybody knows. Yet I see these kids in these blaster forums and, and oh God, it makes me just want to freaking puke. Like, this is like a pet peeve of mine as an editor. It's like, well, these Elka shocks cost this, or I can get these shitty ass Chinese shocks off eBay for this, and they look cool too. Anybody tried them? It's just like, you're just a punk trying to get something for nothing.
Mm-hmm.
I've almost thought about calling Elka and saying, send me a set of shocks, buy me 3 sets of these shitty eBay shocks. Let me do a day where we ride them all back to back to back, so I can just stick a nail in the coffin of this crap. And help the average consumer get it. So I know I'm kind of going off on a tangent. I'll hit it there.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
yeah, you might be sticking a nail in your own coffin if you ride on those China shocks.
right.
That's true.
That's true. No,
it's a good point. It's a good point.
There's a lot of good things that come. Jed, I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down and talk with us. We've been working on this for a couple years to get you on the show. I know how busy you are, and Doug is. Joe, as always, thank you so much. Hey, everybody, you know what you need to do? You need to go out there and subscribe to Dirt Wheels, because everybody is in Dirt Wheels. They're doing a great thing. They're bringing ATVs back. In the chat, they were talking about the fact that they got to see more and more ATVs in the Dirt Wheels magazine.
I mean, look at it. Sport Quad. Look at. Sport Quad. Now that's a small one. Okay, I get it. Now, unfortunately, they kind of covered it up with my address. You don't need to see it. You people don't need to stalk me and know where I live.
Oh yeah.
Check out this Duncan Banshee with these roll arms right here, getting some cover time. Yeah.
No, you don't subscribe to Dirt Wheels, do you?
Of course I do.
Get your subscriptions out there. Hey guys, if you have any questions about roll design, you can reach out to Jed at Roll Design, or you can call Duncan Racing. They'll be more than glad to answer all your questions. Joe, do you got anything new coming with ATV On Demand or UTV On Demand?
We need to go into overtime here a little bit. I just had to ask Jed one question.
Of course.
Jed, did you see the quad that Jeff Henson rode in practice at Works?
Was that a utility quad that he was on?
No, that KO 300. I guess.
Oh, no, I didn't see that one. No.
Okay, Doug saw it.
Yes, Doug saw it.
Did he give you any feedback? Did he have anything to say about it?
Not yet. No.
Okay, I have heard from Doug that he says, "Oh, this thing looks very Raptor 250." So I don't want to give away the story.
Okay.
I was supposed to be there for it, but didn't work out that way. I'll get a test unit, but I just want to kind of drop the bug here that Jeff from Dirt Wheels rode the KO 300 that was at the AIM Expo a couple months ago. He rode it in practice. It works. He was very pleasantly surprised with it. So all of our hopes, still fingers crossed, might turn out to be that could be the Raptor 250 replacement we were looking for. He had a lot of good things to say. I don't want to give anything away because it's going to be one of those Dirt Wheels stories that we used to get in the 80s or 90s where it was like, here's something new, here's something exciting, here's something cool. I'm gonna leave it for him to tell the story so we can sell some magazines. I've been definitely glad I'm a subscriber and I'm going to get to see it. But he did get to ride it on the race course, and it's a pretty good story. And I think we're going to see more of that unit.
Yeah, I'm going to be beating him up on Monday. That's for sure.
Well, maybe we'll get Doug on here next time to give his feedback on it.
Can't wait to get Doug on here. There's so many development questions and history questions that we want to talk to him because he's been around since the 80s. He's been around a long time.
We started racing on one of these in Baja.
Yep, there you go.
Yeah.
He built the first aftermarket frame in the industry.
Right. Yeah.
C&J. There's still a few of them out there, isn't there?
Oh yeah, I see them once in a while. They come through. Yep.
That's freaking awesome. Hey, everybody, get your subscriptions to Dirt Wheels, UTV On Demand, ATV On Demand. Make sure you subscribe to ATV-TALK. Remember, we have 3 shows a week. Your morning show, Sunday, 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, live on YouTube. On Tuesdays, we have our audio podcast platform. It's a totally different show with a different guest each week. You can catch that 5 o'clock Pacific Standard Time on all your podcast platforms. On Wednesday, we do a live Instagram show called Bench Prep Conversations. That's also a different show with different guests. I'm hoping that Jed will join me one day for that, and we can talk more ATVs. I know Joe's been on. It's a great time. We just get technical. We talk a little trash. We have a great time, and that's what that show's for. Everybody, have an amazing weekend. Get your Elka shocks ASAP. You need them because they're the best shock made in our industry, whether you got a truck, UTV, or your ATV. Right on, Jed?
Yep. Thank you, sir. Joe?
Anything in closing?
Oh, well, thank you very much for having me on. And, I'll do it again. I look forward to it, Leonard. Thank you.
All right, brother. Joe, anything you got for closing?
Check out the Grizzly test on YouTube. We're at like 40,000 views in 4 weeks. We're happy with that. We tested Kawasaki's new Brute Force 450. We have talked to Suzuki. And it looks like we'll be doing a 700 4x4 shootout the next few months with the Can-Am Outlander 700 XT, the Honda 4x4 Rubicon, the Grizzly 700, and the King Quad 750. So looks like we've got a big bore single battle coming, and we're very excited for that.
Awesome stuff, guys. Enjoy your weekend. Thank you, guys, everybody. We'll catch you later, and thank you for being on the show.
Awesome.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
Happy Sunday. Bye.